Welcome back to the Proverbs series, guys. For today's video specifically, I want to go to chapter 14, verse 15, which reads, "The simple believes everything, but the prudent gives thought to his steps." That's so good right there. You know, the reason, guys, I wanted to take a look at this passage specifically is because, let's just take a look around us, right? We are living through what many people would call an information crisis, right? Like, at no point in human history have ordinary people had access to more content, more opinions, more news sources, more voices telling them what to think and what to freaking believe, right? And paradoxically, that abundance has not made us more discerning, right? In many ways, it has made us less discerning. And so misinformation spreads faster than correction, right? Outrage travels further than nuance. And the algorithm, we all know what the algorithm is, right? I mean, basically whatever the fact that whatever we see on our recommended pages or what's is what the system thinks we should see, basically rewards the loudest, most emotionally provocative content, regardless of whether it is true or not. And so in that environment that we are living in, guys, Proverbs 14:15 is not just ancient wisdom, it is a survival skill right now. So Solomon identifies two kinds of people, and the difference between them is not intelligence, education, or even social status, but it is the presence or absence of one specific habit: thinking before you believe. Because the simple person believes everything, and the prudent person gives thought to his steps. That gap between absorbing information uncritically and engaging with it carefully is one of the most consequential differences between a wise life and a foolish life. And it shows up not just in what we believe about the news or social media, but in every domain of life where we are being asked to trust something or someone. So let's break down the verse, right? The simple believes everything. We actually encountered the simple person all the way back in Proverbs 1:22, where wisdom cried out, asking how long they would love their simplicity. Remember, the Hebrew word is petty, which describes someone who is naive, open to influence in every direction, and lacking the discernment to evaluate what they're receiving. We established then that the simple person is not necessarily unintelligent, right? They are undiscerning. Their problem is not a lack of mental capacity, but a lack of the habit of applying it. But this is where an important clarification needs to be made here, because it would be easy to misread this verse as a call towards cynicism or something like that, or suspicion of everyone and everything. But that is not what Solomon is describing here. Because the problem with the simple person is not that they trust too many people in general. No, it is that they have no criteria for distinguishing what deserves trust from what does not. They are not generous with their trust in a wise and loving way. They are indiscriminate with it in a way that leaves them perpetually vulnerable. Ephesians 4:14. In Ephesians 4:14, Paul describes the consequence of this kind of undiscerning openness in the context of Christian maturity, right? He says, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and from by the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness of deceitful schemes. And so this image of being tossed in by waves is basically the grown-up version of petty, right? The person who believes everything has no anchor, and every persuasive voice that comes along moves with them because there is nothing stable enough inside them to hold their position when the current changes. And I think this is also particularly relevant in the context of spiritual life, because in 1 John 4:1, John gives a direct command that echoes the spirit of this verse, where he says, "Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, for many false prophets have gone out into the world." And so the instruction to test is not an expression of paranoia or a lack of faith. It is the basic spiritual responsibility of someone who takes truth seriously enough to protect it. And then let's talk about this part of the verse where it says, "But the prudent gives thoughts to his steps," because that's how we want to be like, right? Prudent. And the word prudent, which in Hebrew is arum. It's one of the more interesting words in Proverbs because it has a dual usage in Scripture. Because in a negative context, it describes the craftiness of the serpent in Genesis 3:1. But in a positive context, as it is used here and all throughout Proverbs, it describes the shrewd, careful wisdom of someone who thinks before they act or believe. And so the same quality that makes the serpent dangerous in the wrong hands makes the prudent person wise in the right ones. And this is actually a significant theological observation embedded in the word choice, because prudence is not inherently virtuous. It is a capacity that can be deployed towards good or evil. But what makes the prudent person of Proverbs 14:15 here admirable is not just that they are careful, but that their carefulness is oriented towards what is true and right rather than towards self-serving cunning. And then gives thought to his steps is the defining activity of the prudent person, right? The image is of someone who looks at the ground before placing their foot, who considers where each step is actually landing before committing their full weight to it. It is deliberate, unhurried, and attentive. There is nothing impulsive about it. And so the contrast with the simple person could not be clearer. The simple person believes everything and moves accordingly without checking the ground beneath them. But the prudent person gives thought to each step, which means they're evaluating both what they're being told and where acting on it will actually take them. I think it's also worth noting what giving thought to his steps does not mean, though, because we got to make that distinction, right? Look, it does not mean that the prudent person is slow, indecisive, or skeptical of everything. But, it's not anxiety dressed up as wisdom, but it is the confident, grounded movement of someone who has done the work of thinking carefully and can therefore subsequently act with genuine assurance rather than the false assurance of the person who never even questioned anything in the first place, right? Man, I think for myself, man, like, you guys don't know me personally, but boy am I gullible, boy am I naive, boy do I just believe everything that I read, or at least that's how I was. But again, the reason I already mentioned this, but man, I'm telling you guys, like, we live in a time, bro, where, dude, I mean, okay, like, man, you can't even trust if a video is AI or not, right? So if you can't even trust that, then how are you able to be even discerning to what you see on social media and commercials and stuff like that? You know what I mean? It's just even school sometimes has propaganda. But shout out to my my government class, because they were telling us to literally use discernment because we have to, right? I'm telling you, we have to. But what does that look like? Well, that's where we get practical with it. As I always say, that's where we get applicable. So the first thing is to develop a personal practice of evaluating sources before accepting conclusions. I kind of just talked about that, right? But I say that because the most direct application of this verse to our current moment is the discipline of asking where information is coming from before we decide what to do with it. This applies to what we read online, what we hear in conversations, what we are taught in various contexts, and even what we tell ourselves about our own situations, right? The prudent person does not just ask what is being said, right? They ask who is saying it, why are they saying it, what are they standing to gain, and does this hold up when I check it against what I already know to be reliable? And so building that habit consistently across the domains of our life is one of the most practical expressions of wisdom available to us right now. The second thing is to slow down the distance between hearing and believing. Because one of the most concrete things we can do in response to this verse is simply to introduce a pause between receiving information and accepting it. Like, the simple person collapses that distance to zero. They hear and immediately believe, but the prudent person creates space between the two. That space does not have to be long or complicated, though. It can be as simple as deciding not to share something until we have thought about it for at least a day, or choosing not to form a strong opinion about something until we have heard more than like 3 perspectives on it, right? So the pause itself is the practice of prudence. It is the moment in which thought enters the process before belief does. And the last thing here is to apply the same discernment to our own reasoning that we apply to outside information. This is the most uncomfortable application here in this whole video because it turns the lens inward on us, right? The simple person believes everything they hear from others, but there is an equally dangerous version of simplicity that believes everything we tell ourselves, our own rationalizations, our own justifications, and our own internal narratives are subject to the same need for careful evaluation as anything we receive from outside. So giving thought to our steps means being willing to question our own conclusions, to ask whether the story we are telling ourselves about a situation, a relationship, or a decision actually holds up under honest scrutiny. So that kind of self-examination is not self-doubt. It is the prudent person's willingness to apply the same standard to their own reasoning that they apply to everything else. And so let me just give some closing thoughts here, because this verse, Proverbs 14:15, is one of those verses that becomes more relevant the more you look around at the world we are living in. The simple person who believes everything is not a rare or extreme case, right? They're the default setting for human beings in our current environment, which is designed to bypass careful thinking and go straight for the emotional response. And so the prudent person, we got to remember, is not necessarily smarter. They are not more educated. They are not naturally suspicious, but they have simply developed the habit of thinking before believing, of checking the ground before placing their weight on it, of giving thought to their steps before committing to a direction. So in a world full of voices competing for our belief, that habit is not just wisdom. It is one of the most important things in life that we can cultivate.